And Terry only looks up to me because I am taller than her. I look up to her. She's a great energy here. And just to clarify that actually between 91 when I left as a graduate of the school and 98 when I came back, that's when Masoud Tavakoli created the bioengineering specialty, and it's because of his creativity that I had a more easy way of getting started here because there was something that I was interested in that had already been started. And so I give him a lot of credit. It's one of the reasons I came here. So the reason I'm here today, I credit to Dr. Tavakoli. So this is the call to arms I'm going to have for all of you today. When you go and see a talk, you might remember a lot of things the day of, and then you leave the next day, and then you remember a little bit less the next day, and so on and so forth. And if I asked you a year from now, what is the one thing you took away from this talk? My hope is that you took away the word creativity. And so this is a call to arms to the students in the room, and to the faculty in the room, and the administration in the room, and the staff in the room, which I think is everybody who works here or attends this school. And so creativity is the key word I want you to remember. As far as this work, it was funded by a group called KEEN, which is the Kern Engineering Education Network, and it started by the Kern family. And the Kern family created this company called Generac out of Wisconsin. And one of the key players there is a guy named Doug Melton, who's been a great mentor of mine. A lot of you probably know him. He was a faculty member here in our ECE department, and he's a super great guy. The other guy I mentioned already was Dr. Tavakoli. He is the primary investigator here at Kettering for our KEEN grant. So these two guys have been my mentors. And let me start by bringing up three letters. They're all the same letter, the three R's. We all know about reading, writing, and arithmetic. That always kind of bothered me because that kind of messes up all those words. But we all know about the three R's. And it's a new dawn, and even though those three things are still important, what KEEN is pushing for is the three C's. Now, I showed you those generators a few moments ago, and that was started by the company that Mr. Kern started, and they sold it off over the 90s and into the early 2000s. And they realized you need to be smart and intelligent and educated, but to be successful in business, you need the three C's. So we have the three R's, we have the three C's, and these three C's constitute something called the entrepreneurial mindset. And so let's get into that a little bit. What are entrepreneurs? Now, most people think those are people who start companies. If you actually look up the dictionary definition, it's actually people who undertake great risk and contribute lots of time and energy to a problem, right? And that is kind of like the same as starting a company. But let me share with you a related word, which is enterprise. And an enterprise is undertaking a difficult task. And so starting a company is very similar to that. And you'll notice that entrepreneur and enterprise share a lot of the same letters. So an enterprise, difficult undertaking, entrepreneur, taking considerable risk and putting a lot of yourself into something, they're very similar. And I want you to actually take the preneur part of entrepreneur and put it with the prefix intrapreneur. This scares a lot of people. They're not willing to give up their life and maybe their family's home and their livelihood on an idea. If you are, that's great, that's awesome, and I wish you the best. But for most people, they want the security of a weekly paycheck. And so there's this new concept that has emerged from KEEN, and it is the entrepreneur. It is being an entrepreneur, thinking like an entrepreneur, but working within an existing company. So you have that weekly paycheck, you have a place to park your car, you have a building to go to, you have a coffee maker somewhere that you can drink coffee and talk with people. And so the entrepreneur is very attractive to a lot of our students. Now, some of them want to make the leap, but it's typically a smaller number. And the problem with this word is if you're not an entrepreneur, you think none of this is for you. You know what? All of this is for all of us. And you just have to figure out which camp you want to get into. And it's for you to jump in with both feet. And I'll talk about that today. So what is the entrepreneurial mindset? Thinking like an entrepreneur can also be thinking like an intrapreneur, that's just an entrepreneur within a company, as I mentioned, is the three C's. You need to have curiosity, connections, and create value. Let's start off with curiosity. Mr. Kern tells us that if you don't have a curious nature, you will walk by a million opportunities and never realize it. Be curious. Form connections between different people, different data, different technologies. So you have this curiosity about a problem, you then make connections, and ultimately the goal is to create value for your customer. I contend the faculty here should be doing this. I contend the students should be doing this. The staff should be doing this. The administration should be doing this. And so we should all be curious. We should always be wondering what's going on there. I think the fish is about as curious of the girl is of the fish. Let's talk about connections. Connections can be very simple linear connections. They can be connections that are broken that need to be reformed. They can be more complex network situations. They can be connections between different people going in different directions. Now here's where we have to be creative. Maybe one of these connections isn't working right. Maybe one of these people should be replaced by a network. One of these networks should be replaced by a person. Trying to be creative is the key here to form these connections. Stephen Johnson says, chance favors the connected mind. And so connections are key, and the more connected you are, you're going to have good things happen to you. And the last one is you want to create value. Henry Ford says, success is about creating value. So we have these 3 C's, and smart people have said these are important, and we probably should listen to them. So the key is to be EM-minded. What is EM? EM is entrepreneurially minded. So we want to have this entrepreneurial mindset. We want to have that inside of our brain at all times. So if you have an entrepreneurial mindset, that's great. Are you a good engineer? Or a good scientist? Or whatever it is that your degree happens to be? Are you a good administrator? Are you a good staff member? Are you a good student? And if the answer is no, that's problematic. You can't be entrepreneurially minded and not be a good engineer and expect to be good in business. We could reverse them. What if you're a great engineer? You are book smart and you don't have the entrepreneurial mindset? That's problematic. The goal is to have both of these checked off. So if both are working and clicking for you, you will do well. So let's get back to these 3 C's. And I want to focus, I just realized I got this little clicker thingy. So let's focus on this word create value. Let's drop the value and then drop the E. And we'll drop the E in just a second, sorry. Let's just talk about the word create. I looked up the definition of the word create. I thought about the word create. And yes, there are ways in which human beings and animals create things. Where there wasn't a baby, you can make a baby. And I think you all know the whole process. If the horses have figured it out, we should be able to figure it out. So creating something that didn't exist before, that's one way of thinking about create. But let's drop the E and add ivity to that. And creativity is part of this 3C model. And let's talk about why that is. How do you come up with an idea and then take that idea and make it successful? You grow that idea. That's really the question that I think all of us ask every day. How am I going to be successful at home, in my personal relationships, at work? Because success breeds good things, better pay, job security, etc. And I think we all want that. So at the very middle of these 3 C's are an idea. And to come up with that idea, I contend you need to be creative. I don't think anybody would dispute that. So that's kind of the 4th C. Now, to come up with an idea, you need to have an opportunity. And if you look up the definition of opportunity, you'll find out it's a good chance for success. Again, I think we all want success for ourselves, for those around us. And so how do you come up with an opportunity and an idea and then get into the 3 C's? In some cases, you will start with a solution. And then that solution is an opportunity to find out what problem it solves. In other cases, you will be faced with a problem. And then you have an opportunity to see what solution there is to that problem. Now, either you can do the upper half or the lower half. Either way, start in this circle, and it's the opportunity that links solutions to problems. It's the opportunity that links problems to solutions. And what starts at the very middle of this is, what is the kernel of the topic that you're going to work on? Everything starts from a kernel and grows from there. So if we have a kernel of an idea, we can then use our brain, our synapses, to form thoughts and somehow come up with a solution or a problem or whatever happens to be for your particular situation. Now, for most kids and most people, they enjoy working on things that make them happy. I know I do. And things that make them sad, they avoid. So the question here is, as far as what you're going to work on in life, for our students, they have to decide this. What's the thing that makes you happy? Because the thing that makes you happy, you will have passion for that topic. And you'll work on it every day without even thinking. I enjoy my job. I hesitate to say this in front of the administration, but I like my job so much, I do it every day. There are no hours. There are no hours related to it as far as I'm concerned. I would be doing what I'm doing anyways if they didn't pay me. That's the part I probably shouldn't say. But if you've got passion for something, it's being recorded. I know. Strike that. I will just tell you this real quick little joke. So a guy goes out to Vegas, and he goes out and he gets some food, and he starts eating that, and he gets a little, he imbibes some fluids, and he goes to a magic show, and he is uninhibited. And the magician's doing all these tricks, and he can't help himself. He starts screaming out, "How'd you do that? How'd you do that? How'd you do that?" The guy finally stops the show, and he says, "Sir, if I told you, I'd have to kill you." The guy thought about it for a second, and he said, "Would you tell my mother-in-law?" So that's a cautionary tale. Nobody tell the administration what I just told you. All right? Okay. All right, so Kern, that entrepreneurship group, has come up with a model. If you had queried a whole bunch of CEOs, really smart, successful entrepreneurs, what makes a good flow from idea to business, they've come up with this. It looks pretty busy. Let me simplify it for you. On the upper left-hand corner is a kernel of an idea. On the bottom right-hand corner is a person bringing value to their customers, creating value. Now, these are all the steps in between. There are a lot of steps involved. There's different ways in which they've arranged these blocks. This is the one that kind of makes more sense to me. You have some kind of an opportunity, and you come up with an idea on how to solve it. You design the exact details of it, and then you make an impact by bringing it to the market. If you have a great idea in your head, if you don't share it with anybody, it doesn't do anybody any good. And so in my work, I focused on certain blocks here, and I've pushed them into the classroom. Now, it's important to note, this is the traditional way in which engineering schools capture this overall educational curriculum. They talk about design. How do you design this? How do you design that? They have very contrived problems. Imagine you have this part and it has to carry this load. How big does it have to be? Or what material would you make that of? And that's the design. But what led up to having to make that design in the first place? What do you do with that design after you've come up with it? So what we're focusing on here is trying to expand the footprint of the education. All right. As far as the timing, we got funded back in 2013. We beta tested it in winter. We did a refinement in spring. And I collaborated with a friend of mine out of Lawrence Tech, Eric Meyer. This looks crazy, but let me just kind of simplify it for you. The blue blocks are the original content of the class. The green blocks are what I had to wedge in there to cover those things I just mentioned. As far as these blocks over here, these square blocks there and there. So what I've done is I've wedged these in here, and then I've worked in a couple different assessment time points to figure out how it's working with the students. And this was a real challenge. If you're going to do something to an existing class and it's already full of content, how do you wedge the new stuff in? And I'll go back to the word of creativity. You've got to figure out where you might have redundancy, where you can find some space, where you can take an existing piece of content and maybe twist it a little bit so it has a different bent on it. But we were able to get it all in, and I don't think the students, they didn't express disfavor in how fast it was. It wasn't overly paced. And we were able to get all the original equipment in, or curriculum in, and then still fit in the new curriculum. And so let me start on this block diagram here by focusing first on how do you identify an opportunity. So if we want to come up with some great thing that we're going to push out and help the world and change the world, we need to have an opportunity in the first place. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to end up engineering, we sometimes use it as a verb, a new product or an idea. How do we do that? Well, let's look at the words. Ingenium is Latin for ingenious, and it means natural, talent, or clever. If you actually take the first part of ingenium, engine, you realize that's the first part of engineer. You may not have realized this, but a double ER in the end is an old French suffix, which means one who has something to do with the root word. Now, this word maybe isn't as obvious to us, but think about an auctioneer, one who auctions, mountaineer, pioneer, etc. These are one who has something to do with the root word. So if ingenium is natural, talent, or clever, this is one who is naturally talented or clever. The example I like to give in class is a magic trick. So a number of you have seen this trick before, so if you've seen it before, that's fine. Say, exactly. Boy, where's my wife? Okay. My mother-in-law is a very nice lady. Okay. So we've got this stick, and it's got 6 colors on it, and we've got 6 colors on the other side. And have you seen this trick before? Okay. So if you could just pick a number between 1 and 6 and tell me the number. Any number between 1 and 6. 3. Okay. So 3. 1, 2, 3. So that's a purplish pinkish color. So I'm going to, and then there's nothing in my hand, so I'm going to put it in my hand there, and we've turned it into the color that you selected. But I have to reset it because I'm going to have to do the trick later. So there we go. You think, okay, now how was that done? Somebody had to engineer this. Now, honestly, this is as simple as a stick with tape on the front, and tape on the back. So I have a novice interest in magic, and so I do magic in every one of my classes. And my goal and intention is to say, hey, what you're going to do this semester, I need you to be magical and come up with things and be naturally talented and clever. This is naturally talented and clever, the person who came up with this. And all you're doing is as you turn your hand over, you roll it in your fingers, and you're always showing the same side. And then I have to force it to be pink or purple. So if you say 3, I say 1, 2, 3. If you say 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you say 6, it's S-I-X. 1 is O-N-E. 2 is T-W-O. 4 is F-O-U-R. 5 is F-I-V-E. Don't ever do it more than once. All right. Now, let me show you another trick. And I go into elementary schools, and I want to inspire kids to go into engineering. And I always tell them, hey, I want to do a levitating woman trick, because everybody knows about the levitating woman trick. But I couldn't get anybody to agree to do it other than Barbie. So Barbie agreed to do it. And right now she's resting on this cup. So I'm going to pull this cup out. And already the kids are thinking, oh, how was that done? So then I come along with this ring, just a simple coat hanger that's been bent. And I bring that down. And I bring that around her body. And the students say, how did you do that? And I said, and I always tell them how this trick is done. And I never tell them how this trick is done. So it's magic. It's magic. Now, I will tell you, I had a little girl, a kindergartner, come up to me about an hour later. We were doing an in-class project, and I had covered Barbie back up. And she said, is Barbie still floating? I said, yes, she is. And she went. So I have 3 daughters. That's how they behave. If you don't have any daughters, they're very excited. So you need to be naturally talented and clever to solve problems. And I don't know about you, but for me, I enjoy solving problems. It's what gets me out of the bed in the morning. My life would be very boring if I didn't have problems to solve. So we need to be creative. Now, one of the definitions you'll see for creativity is somebody who's clever and ingenious. Wow. That's the definition of an engineer. And most, if not all of you, are engineers or related to engineers or have something to do with engineering in this room. This school needs to be clever and ingenious to solve the problems that we face. Whether it's, how do you teach this class? How do we work the budget? How do we keep the buildings clean and well heated? All these things are challenges. Our students are part of this. Our professors, our administration, and our staff. A call to arms for you all to be creative, for you all to use your natural talent and cleverness and to be ingenious. Now, Lawrence Tech helped me out a little bit by providing an entrepreneurship survey, which I used in my class. What I found is that our students are coming to us with energy. They want to succeed. They have passion. They want to build things. And some of the students, a very small number, want to be entrepreneurs. Most identify themselves as entrepreneurs, and some are a different shape and come out of a different hole, and I'm not sure how that all happened. But some don't fit into either of those categories, and that's fine. So we need to work with all of these students. Here's an example. I like to give my students case studies so they can see where somebody else has already succeeded to kind of give them some wind beneath their wings. And this is a person who is wearing an invisible bike helmet. Most people don't like helmets. They think they're confining. If you're a female, you might not like the fact what it does to your hair. And so this is an issue. So over in Sweden, they've come up with an idea of an invisible bike helmet. She's wearing it right now. And I asked my students ahead of time, how would you build an invisible bike helmet? And they think about that. That's a challenge. So here's the solution. They've come up with this thing that as you go through a certain amount of acceleration, there's a sensor inside there, and it deploys an airbag around your head. And it runs for about $450, and they got venture capital, and they're successful. And they're employing people now because of this idea. What about these containers that you see all over the world? In movies, out and about, you see them all over the place. You see them on trucks. You see them on ships. You see them on rail cars. Malcolm McLean, back in the 50s, ran a trucking company. And going down the eastern seaboard from the north to the south, from the south to the north, he discovered that his trucks were sitting there in heavy, heavy traffic. They hadn't really developed a very good highway system yet. And even with the highway system, it's still kind of congested. And his truckers would watch ships passing by. He thought, this is ridiculous. Out on the open water, if you run into somebody, you just move over a little bit. There's a lot of open water. On the roads, you're not as free to do that. So his initial idea was to drive the trucks onto the ship. And then he realized, wait a second, then I'm wasting the whole truck and the wheels and everything. Let's just make the container. And so Malcolm McLean made a metal box that affects your life every day. The reason why t-shirts cost $6 or $7 is because of Malcolm McLean. And Pierre did a great story. I'm driving home one day, I listen to this story, I take that story, I bring it into the class. And they talked about how they made t-shirts for one of their different shows, and they followed the cotton to the place where they spun the cotton, where they then wove the cotton, where they then screen printed it. And because it is so ridiculously cheap to move products in this fashion, they go to the cheapest, absolutely cheapest place on earth to get every one of the different steps done. One of these boxes can be made for a few $1,000s. A metal box, if you had come up with this metal box, I tell my students, you could buy an island. You could have your enemies killed and nobody would know. There's all sorts of great things would be available to you, and bad things too. Okay. With great power comes great responsibility. What about the vacuum? I tell my students that when my wife and I were laughing about this morning. When I was a bachelor, I didn't own a vacuum. And usually the women in the room, there's not too many, but they say, oh! And that was my wife's, it's so gross. I said, it just never occurred to me to buy a vacuum sweeper. So then we're going to get married, and we're going to do the registration. And I explained to my male students what that is, and they all look at me quizzically. You have to pick out what and do what? It's a terrible process. But I learned about this thing called Electrolux. I had never heard of Electrolux. In fact, for a long time, it was a Michigan company. Never heard the Cadillac of vacuum cleaners. Well, this guy named Sir James Dyson comes along and says, I can do it better. Now, what Electrolux had done is through trial and error, they didn't have computational fluid dynamics available to them, they made the best vacuum cleaner they could. And it was considered the Cadillac, and it lasted well, and it was expensive and all that type of thing. Dyson said, I've now got new mathematical abilities available to me. I'm going to use them. And so he's now been knighted. He's worth over $1 billion by taking something that already existed and improving it to the point that it became more popular than the Cadillac in the first place. So these are case studies that hopefully inspire our kids. Now, how do we come up with an idea? How do we think of something? There are two basic schools of thought in the neuroscience world, and I certainly do not contend that I'm anything of an expert, but just from what I've read, it seems like it kind of falls into two camps. Either you have an idea that originates in your brain, that's what some people think, and then it comes out and you perceive that as a thought, and that the origin was within the gray matter. Or the other thought is that exogenous, outside influences actually permeated your brain, and then you connected those in certain ways. And the thought was actually outside stimuli. You then connected it in an interesting way, and then came up with a thought. So here's one way you could kind of think about it. If you have different chunks of information, if you then can get them on the table and then connect them, that's the way you come up with a thought. Now, if you want to do it the way that Edison did it, Edison realized that there was something that occurred at that edge of consciousness and unconsciousness. As you were falling asleep or as you're waking up, in that transition kind of twilight time, your mind becomes uninhibited and wild thoughts are able to form, and you're able to remember them. Now, he would typically work 18 hours a day, maybe 19 hours a day, and live on 4 to 5 hours of sleep. So to force himself to not to get too deep asleep and then forget the idea, he would sleep in his chair with arms over each armrest, holding on to metal spheres. And he had metal pans below the metal spheres. And as he would start falling asleep, and the thoughts would then come, he would then arouse himself and write down the idea. If he got too deep into sleep and he dropped one of the balls, he'd immediately wake up and realize he was getting too deep into sleep, and hopefully he would be able to capture the thought before it was fleeting. So I don't do that with my students. Instead, to form the idea, to get that kernel, to end up with an opportunity that solves a problem or a problem that needs a solution, what we do is we do something called opportunity ideation. And sometimes it's really clear, oh, I had this idea and it's so clear. Other times it becomes hazy, or it's a little bit of a roller coaster ride for the students to try. It's a moving target. They struggle to figure out what idea they're going to come up with or what it is they're actually doing. But there are 4 techniques you can use. You can improve an existing product, you can use your personal experience, you can network, or you can do something called build a grid. And I'm going to show you these 4 techniques. And we use these in class. And these, it turns out not a lot has been really written exactly on how to do this the best way. So I've tried these 4 methods, and it seems to work with my students. Improve an existing product. It could be eyeglasses. It could be a thermometer, a cast, a bandage that sticks too much and it's painful to take off. How many people have had that experience? So it's a product, it works, but it doesn't work perfectly. So let's improve that. Another one would be personal experience. You're sick and a product didn't exist and you struggled. It could be a family member. I had some very personal comments come from students with a sister, a brother, a mom, or dad who was struggling with life-altering medical problems. And medicine, the current technology, wasn't addressing it. And that's passion. What about networking? A lot of our kids, they have a dentist, they have a doctor. One of the students' moms was a physical therapist. They were able to contact these people and get problems that way. And the last one was build a grid. I learned this from Doug Melton. And this is something I'd never heard of before, and I've tried to research it to find out where it comes from. I asked Doug, he said he didn't remember where he got it. But I like to use this. You come up with a list of people. Just think of as many groups of people as you can think of. Elderly, infants, surgeons, soldiers. And then come up with different technologies. Let's say gaming, 3D TV, wireless. And then see where there might be an intersection where games weren't currently being developed for infants, but now we have an opportunity because this technology already exists. These people already exist. Let's intersect the two and come up with a new product or idea. And it really develops and foments an idea that normally wouldn't have probably entered your brain. All right, so here is an example. Some of the manufacturing folks in the room probably could speak to this more eloquently than I, but CNC programming, computer code, was one of the reasons it was developed was to make machining more repeatable, more accurate with computer numerically controlled machining, which a lot of you I think are probably familiar with. And this technology, once it became available and was working well, was then able to be used for plotters. And I worked in industry. I went here as a co-op. I worked in industry. We used plotters all the time. We even have a plotter in our department right now. And the plotters build off of this technology, X, Y, Z motion, et cetera. And that technology led to printers. And the printers led to 3D printers. And the 3D printers led to us building these very organic shapes, which would be very difficult to machine under any one of the normal conventional machining techniques. So if you can come up with an idea in the computer, we can then make it. And for the body, there are many, many organic shapes, plus all of us are shaped slightly differently. And so if I want to make a custom part for you, I now have a way to do it. But it started through this kind of circuitous route this way over 50 years before I got here. And you might think of a word processor as a way for you to type in the computer your thoughts and then print that out. This is the engineer's word processor of today. Here's where you come up with your ideas, and then here's how you print them out. It's the same thing as a document. All right, so another call to arms on creativity. Another definition, transcend the traditional. The status quo. Break it apart, move beyond, make it better. Question the paradigms that exist in your organization. All right, so in our class, how do we do this? We try and be creative. Dr. Tevakoli created the medical equipment design specialty back in 1996, and I came in 98 and was able to build on that. We weren't doing surgery at the time. I instituted surgery. The students love it. What am I trying to do there? I'm trying to put you in the position of the surgeon so you can identify where there might be a shortcoming in the current medical technology. That might make it better for the surgeon. If it's better for the surgeon, it might be better for the patient. So this is one of the ways in which we try and get students thinking about ideas that they could pursue. And I then took that idea and built up this YouTube channel. I encourage you to go to this. It goes over how we do the whole process from surgery simulation to how do you make people a medical entrepreneur, et cetera. And as part of that process, things kind of exploded. The last year has been very, very active for me. I wanted to create these videos, and so on almost of a lark, after I'd written the grant, I realized I wanted to have a green screen studio. So I used my PDA money to build this, which is like a professional development grant for those who don't know. And I built a green screen studio. I talked to Dr. Tevakoli, Dr. Hargrove, found some space, and I have this huge green screen studio now over in the Mott Center. And I've shot many, many, many videos. We've figured out all sorts of fun things. For example, let me show you this. I wanted to talk about medical innovation from our entrepreneurs of tomorrow. This is on my YouTube channel. And so we started playing around things, and I introduced myself. Here we go. And then we found out how I could put myself on the screen with myself. And so silly little things like that. But there's all sorts of information out there. I won't go into great detail on this. But creativity, this stuff just screams for you to be creative. It gives you lots of opportunities to do things. Then on the videos, I wanted to have this we ended up developing this idea that we'd have an alter ego for me. And so I'm Dr. Bioengineering. And so I have these little videos. We would sit down and write little funny bits, because I don't know if you've seen a lot of YouTube videos. Most of them are terrible. So I thought, well, I don't want it to be terrible. So at the least, even if it's corny, I figured that's better than terrible. And so maybe, and so the people that I've showed to around here, people, they laugh, and that's what I want. I want a little bit of humor. And so one of the little running jokes we had on it was, I would move the tape for it, and sometimes it's the case that there was no tape. But you know, kind of nerds have the tape on their glasses. So on every video we shot, we had the tape in a different place. Here's an example of one of the videos. We had to create a little video here, and we needed sound effects.
What do you say?
See, bioengineering. Those are calipers and bubble wrap.
I didn't see you there. I was just doing some science. Hi, I'm Dr. Bioengineering, and today we're going to talk about surgery simulation. We have used this.
So we go through this little video, and I take a lot of the images that were shot right in our lab. These are all stock images right out of our lab. Talk about what we're going to talk about, go through some of the details. And in this surgery right here, we develop a way for students to simulate the human body. So before they actually go into a simulated human body, they go into this little box, and they go ahead and perform surgery. And then they're given a camera, and this camera is actually the same camera an electrician would use to peer behind the walls. And I saw this in the catalog, and I thought, oh, that's perfect. And it looks just like the ones we actually use in surgery. And so just trying to get this different technology, pull it together, deploy it in the classroom is a challenge. And you're not always sure if it's going to work with the students. I'll just give you another quick example as far as being creative. I teach statics as well. And one of the things we talk about in statics are trusses. And creativity can be anything. I want to talk about a triangular truss. I go in the coffee room, I get some coffee stir sticks and some push pins. And I'm able to push on this and show how some of the truss members are going into buckling because they're in compression, others are going into tension. And to show buckling, I mean, obviously it's trivial. Students understand that. They understand things could break very easily in buckling, but it's going to take a lot more load for it to fail in tension. So you can be as creative as you want with a lot of the resources that are sitting right around you, I'm sure. All right, so we have these different surgical environments. And the idea, again, is for the students to look in here and say, what's challenging about this? And it's hard for me to tell you. It's better for you to experience it. And some of these surgeries will go on for 90 or 100 minutes. The students are, I mean, honestly, a bomb could go off in the room. They wouldn't know it. They are so focused on what they're doing. In this case, the students are trying to get out a diseased gallbladder. And they don't want to leak any of the bile. It's a challenging surgery. Here, students are clearing a blockage through a tortuous path. And they've built themselves their own balloon angioplasty device. This takes, again, about 90 or 100 minutes to do. They build a leg from scratch. And so we start with the bones from a company called Sawbones, and then we put on the ligaments, the tendons, the muscles, the nerves, arteries, and veins. And this is my sneaky way of teaching them anatomy in a very kinesthetic sense. I could stand out there with 2D images all day. When I show them the 2D images and say, now build this in 3D, that's challenge. They have to cut out all their own muscles, they have to staple things together, put screws in, and now they've got this anatomically accurate, size-accurate lower extremity. And now what do? We break it. And the sound is just horrifying. Crack. So we break the bone, and then we talk to them about how do you put it back together. They have to scrub into this, which means they have to have on full garb. It's difficult to talk, difficult to hear. Your voice is obscured. You can't really tell who's who. It can be kind of frustrating. But we go through the biomechanics and the surgical aspects of how you do that procedure. We imagine that our patient got hip arthritis. We then go through the procedure of removing all of the diseased materials and replacing those with artificial joints. We also then imagine that our patient also suffered knee arthritis, remove the diseased tissues and put in the replacement parts. So once they come up with their idea, they've been inspired by these different surgeries, they've got their idea, they've gone through all of these different opportunity ideation techniques. They then pitch their idea to a physician, they get 1 minute. And their goal is to present a business model. And if you don't know, a business model is who are your customers, identify that in your pitch, and what is your value proposition? What value do you bring to the table? And then to demonstrate it, as opposed to doing it live, you have to shoot a commercial. Oh, into the green screen lab, you've got to write scripts, you've got to get costumes, you've got to come up with music and backgrounds, because green screen, you need the background. And so this is something that the students, I didn't know how it would go over. The first semester it went so well, we continued it, and I made some little tweaks, which I'll show you in just a second. But here's an example.
Simple Joe. He loves pizza. He eats it for every meal. This is Simple Joe. He loves pizza. He eats it for every meal. But sometimes, Joe doesn't feel so good after, and he can't understand why. One day, Joe has an idea while watching TV. Maybe it's the cheese, and maybe it's the bread. What could be causing the problem? The app is downloaded to your smartphone and keeps a log of your dietary needs.
So I've kind of edited the commercial down a little bit, but if you take a little piece of like litmus paper and expose it to the food, put it in your app, it'll tell you if one of the allergens that you're allergic to is going to be a problem or not. And so this is from personal experience where the students themselves had some issues with food and had friends and family, and they wanted to develop something that would help their friends and family. So there's the passion. Here's an example where students intersected wireless sensors and soldiers. So let me take a look at wireless technology and soldiers. This came out of the grid.
It's been chaotic and bloody.
And that makes the medic's job of diagnosing a wounded soldier's injuries difficult, like locating bullet wounds or identifying shell shock.
This is where Skin comes in. Skin, the synthetic knowledgeable injury notice, works as a soldier's second skin that is aware of any punctures such as bullet wounds or stabs. Skin is worn underneath a soldier's standard issue body armor and gear, and does not impede the wearer's range of motion or abilities while in the field of duty. A quick synchronized press of the switch on the wrist of Skin and one on the medic's tablet allows them to view diagnostic data, like bullet wound location, from Skin. It also has a G-sensor that gets tripped at the event of a large explosion going off in close proximity to the soldier. Skin helps clear the minds of medics and makes it easy for them to think themselves through a healing about fellow soldier.
All right, so these are all then demonstrated to the physician. The students have to put it all, it has to be done in the can, completed, and then they get to show it. They don't get to modify their presentation based on how it's going. And so that was somewhat limiting. The students are so used to talking, which they don't really like to do. They'd rather passively submit a report and run away. That's happy. To have to talk, oh, they don't like that. This, you might think would be less stressful, but when you get in front of a camera and you shoot it and you look at it, you're like, I don't like that. And you have to go through that editing process. It compels you to do your best job possible. The physicians that I had come in here, I've got a lot of colleagues in town. I work in the medical field for my research. So I'm able to always get a physician to come in, they review it, they give feedback, and then the students then need to protect their work by forming a patent, which they then draft from scratch. They also have to make sure the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is okay with their idea. So they have to submit something called a 510K. It's very similar to kind of the 401K idea where there's a 510th paragraph with a kth subpart says something that's really important to getting something approved. And so they call it a 510K submission. It's part of the law from the Food and Drug Administration. And here's one of our students' 510Ks. And then the federal government also wants to know that you've got a good handle on how you're going to manufacture this, how you're going to keep track of your raw materials, how you're going to make sure that you're getting customer feedback. In the event there's a recall on a medical implant, it's kind of a big deal because it's already inside the people. It's kind of hard to swap out a part inside somebody like you can in a car. So we go through the ISO 1345 and they have to develop and make sure they're compliant with this. Now the one thing that we did to change it up a little bit the second semester, the first semester you were able to change your ad based on ideas that came up throughout the semester, feedback to the physician. Maybe you found out your 510K wasn't valid, you had to change the design. So the first semester students redid their ad and made the improvements. The second semester they were allowed to make a commercial the first time to present to the physician, but at the end of the semester to demonstrate their final idea, I made them convey everything from a single picture. So we go from the happy place for a student, which is I want to submit a report. And by the way, professors, limit the length of the report. I make a lot of my reports one page, one side. And they tell me that's a lot harder than going out to Google and copying and pasting tons of stuff and submitting 50 pages. It's a lot easier to submit 50 pages. You can't hide in one page. So anyways, the written report is still their happy place. Oral report is a little bit more uncomfortable. Shooting a video is even more uncomfortable. And the most uncomfortable, if you want to really dig deep for your students and make them be creative, is to convey everything in a single image. So here are some examples where our students have done that. And they have to design the layout. All of this is completely done by the students. So let me give you some feedback from the students, from the classroom. And I've kind of paraphrased this a little bit because some of the comments are kind of long. But what this student says, I need to, number one, they now know they need to identify the target audience and be able to rationally present their value proposition. This work showed me I just need one great idea, passion, and some hard work. And you know, honestly, it comes down to being that simple. I like the creativity. There is so much to do after you come up with the initial idea. And that's important. The initial idea is the tip of the iceberg. And it's important to know that. Do you have the perseverance to stick with it? And as far as creativity goes, one last definition. Come up with new ideas every day. That's it. Thank you very much.